My name is Thomas McCarthy-Howe. Can you hear me? All good? All right. So I'll be talking about the vCon spec today. We have a couple new extensions to it. I got from the show of hands beforehand that some of you are new to vCons. So it'll be my pleasure to introduce you to the topic. So before I introduce that, I'll introduce me. I have a lot of friends here, but I don't know all of you. I've basically been in this market forever. My dad was a administrator at Raytheon back in the 50s designing torpedoes. And torpedoes have a transducer, and transducers steer the torpedo. And that led me into a life of modems and voice over IP, and eventually SIP, which led me to the internet, which led me to unified communications, which led me to despair. I hope a lot of you had that same despairing thing. And that actually finally led me to vCons eventually. So what I'd like to do is, for those of you who do not know about vCons, to introduce that topic really quickly. So if you haven't heard of a vCon, it is a new file format, just like a JPEG or an XLS, but instead of it holding an image or a spreadsheet, it holds a conversation. And it has 4 parts of it. One part of the vCon is a recording. It could be any kind of recording, audio, video, messaging, email. It's the least surprising part of a vCon. Another part of a vCon is the parties who is in the recordings themselves. You'll see why that's important in a moment. And those parties are a fairly better idea of parties than a phone number. It can be a phone number, email address, civic location, DID if you're a Web3 person. It also contains attachments, which we're going to talk a lot about, which are the things that give the context to the conversation. And finally, a running list of all the times and places the conversation was analyzed. The whole point behind a vCon is so that we can protect people as we feed robots. If you've been following my writing for a while, I love calling vCons robot food. You are what you eat. Now, the thing about vCons I want you to also pay attention to is this is an upcoming IETF standard. We've had a working group at the IETF for about 2 years, a very active group who are the same guys who brought you those wonderful protocols like SIP and STIR and Shaken. And we expect to have a last call draft ready sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. So we're pretty close to the end of it. It's a pretty stable specification. And so if you have couple other terms I want you to hear about when we talk about vCons. There's a thing called a conserver. A conserver is a thing which transforms and manages vCons. If the vCon is a file, how do you deal with the files? And a conserver is how you do it. It's basically if you are a data science person, it's an extract, transform, and load pipeline. It takes in vCons from other communication systems, things like SIP trunks and soft phones and free switches and asterisks, and then amends those vCons to give them more information. Because maybe the person who recorded the conversation did not have access to your LLMs, your enterprise data, or anything else that you need to make sure that vCon is in great robot shape. Then the conserver pushes those out into existing databases and information systems, so you can use it like any other kind of data. So for instance, you could push it out into an MCP server, and that MCP server would then get access to your customers' conversations, so you can ask interesting things of it. Or it might go into an application like Salesforce, or simply into your data infrastructure. If you want to learn more about conservers, conserver.io is the open documentation source. Of course, it's the IETF, so vCons are an open standard. They were developed in the sunlight. The conserver itself is an open source framework. You can learn all about it at conserver.io or visit us on GitHub. And finally, I want to talk about SCIT. Two more things. SCIT is another protocol that we're working with. SCIT stands for the Supply Chain Integrity, Transparency, and Trust Protocol. It's a way for us to manage software assets as they traverse the network. The origination of SCIT was at the same moment and place that the SolarWinds hack was discovered, and we realized that we didn't have a way of guaranteeing that the software that you build was free from malware injected above you. The ability to understand what is in your software is what Skit's about. And Skit can be used with vCons, which I'm going to show you today, to give the same sort of benefits to solve things like deepfakes, to solve things like AI transparency on pipelines. One last thing. One of the reasons that vCons is such a big deal is they are a toolkit for enabling responsible data management. Here's just an example of it. You can have a vCon, which contains all the information you'd like. You can create another vCon based on the first. The second vCon, the one you've now created, can now have the data which you want to share, a redacted data, a minimized data. In this case, we have a social services organization that is recording a citizen in trouble, but the citizen's details are not important to the people who are governing the center. These are private details. So that you can create a vCon that creates only the data that you care about to share, and it can relate itself back to the original. Why? That way you can keep the integrity of the data. So if one day someone says, is that really what was redacted? You can say, well, yes, it was. Here's how we got it. So that's one of the nice little things about vCons. They do a really great job at keeping data private. It's a great toolbox. OK, so I told you about my tech background, but these days I work for a car company. And by a car company, I mean I work for a contact center that sells new cars on behalf of franchised auto dealers. We have a couple of hundred agents that work for a couple of hundred dealerships around the country. And we answer the phones because our customers' salespeople are busy helping the people in the showroom. We're what's called a BDC. We're the first guys to make the phone call. And the technology that we're talking about here was all developed in the BDC. And if you're in any way involved in the automotive market, all I can tell you is the BDC is best understood as an adult after-school classroom where all the truants are. That would be the BDC, full of drama. Not a place where global technologies get developed, but in this case, we did. So we decided to listen to all the conversations we were having with our customers because we thought we'd be better at doing our jobs if we knew the mistakes we made. And we realized this early on in our lives because as soon as the company grew, we realized that we couldn't hear every conversation anymore. Very difficult to govern them. And so you might hear the saying before, only the owner of a lemonade stand has listened to all of their customers. And that's very true, right? If you have more than 2 employees, one of those people didn't hear something a customer said. But it's worse than that because even if he did hear it, he's probably forgotten most of it. So the ability to scale conversations is not just a problem with many people, it's a problem with you too. We all have that problem. Well, so why don't we just have robots? Robots scale when people don't. Why don't we have all the robots listen to all these calls? It sounds like a great idea, and in fact, we do that a lot. What's the downside of that? Well, there's a really particular downside, which is the biometrics, like your voice and your likeness, are highly sensitive data. Very dangerous behavior, recording everything a person says for lots of reasons. This is one big one. So the GDPR identifies your biometrics as being specially sensitive data because you can change your email address, you can change your physical address. I changed my name when I got married, but I cannot change the name of I cannot change the way I sound. I can't change the way I look. This is with me forever. We all have our burdens. Because you can't change them, it's sensitive. Because you can be deepfaked through them, it's sensitive. So that's the danger. Now, don't be fooled. We don't have to wait for AI regulation to do something about this. We already have data privacy laws on the books. The GDPR does a great job at identifying what your digital rights are. And we have done an awful job as an industry protecting those. And now we're at a spot where we don't know if it's AI generated or not. We don't know if it's deepfaked or not. We don't know if it's a clone or not. Our complacency has to end. We need to step forward and really start to guarantee that the AI pipelines that we're feeding with our communications equipment is filled with actual, real conversations. So you might not know this, but I'm going to tell you right now, you have digital rights as a person, and you do not give them up when you get recorded. You have the digital right to know what companies know about you. You have the right to access it. You have the right to ask for its correction. You have to ask for its deletion. You have the right to say how it gets processed or not. You have the right to take your data. And all of these things are not given up when you say, yes, I'll be recorded into a contact center. You retain these rights. And that's going to become a very important thing. So the vCon, at the very heart of this, it enables a responsible analysis of these conversations. And that's the important part. This is going to become the important part of all of our lives. Because I'll tell you one thing that does not get commoditized. It's that conversation. When you record a conversation, it's the only one. You're the only one who ever should have it. Unlike a SIP trunk, which competes on price, vCons are data, and so there isn't another. It's the only kind of NFT I would actually like to own. In a world where AI is running out of data, what is more important, what is more valuable than what customers are saying to a business? Not much. The vCons are enabling that responsible analysis. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the consent extension. There's 2 new extensions to vCons that we presented in IETF Madrid 2 weeks ago. This is our first public conversation about them outside the IETF. So I'm very happy to have it here, in such an august, geeky crowd. And so let's talk about consent. So the vCon itself has the idea that you can attach things to it. And when we started making vCons, I work for a sales organization. I started attaching leads to the vCon. Why? Because I'm trying to figure out what people are talking about. And we're calling them because they called us about a car. The car is defined in the lead. The lead has a person's name, the car they care about, and any of their questions. What better to give a robot than the lead? But as time has gone on, we've realized that consent and all other kinds of context are just as important. So I'm sure you've heard about the fine that Apple paid for the $100 million of regulation fines for improperly analyzing Siri recordings. It would not have happened if they had paired the consent with the recording, but they did not, and we do not. The consent attachment allows you to pair consent with the media so that when you've got it, you know what you're allowed to do with it. So, for instance, imagine this, that I have a vCon of one of my conversations, and I've given the following consent, that you can use my recording for generative AI, text and data mining, but not for sharing. And I said that. If you're about to do that to this file, you have a clue about what you can and cannot do. But also, there's more, right? So consent is not something that you ever give away permanently. When you give consent into a contact center, you have the right to withdraw that consent. And the people who gained your consent have the responsibility to listen to you and have that consent withdrawn. So what does that mean, to withdraw a consent? Well, there's one thing which is really different in today's world, and that is consent is no longer a yes or a no. We think about consent in terms of communications consent. Yes, you can call me. You can text me. But this is not the consent that I'm talking about. It's a bigger idea. The consent of what they can do with the data that you've given them, your most personal, sensitive data. Are you saying, yes, you can use my data for AI training? Yes, you can use my data for text and data mining. These are the consents that you might give, but because you have digital rights, you may also withdraw. And so the consent extension allows vCons to be managed dynamically as consents are given and withdrawn and shared across networks. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the extension itself. So what's in a consent extension? So if you haven't seen the vCon before, it's a JSON. So it's easy to read. I'll show you one in a second. I love going to places where I can show anything that looks like code. It doesn't happen often. So what's in the consent extension? The party. Who's giving the consent? Remember, that party is a very rich idea. That party can be identified very opaquely like we do today with a phone number, but it can also be identified very strongly with DID. distributed ID in the Web3 world. What recording are we talking about? What recording has been consented to? A vCon can hold all kinds of recordings. Which one does this consent cover? How long is it good for? When does that consent expire? Is consent forever and ever and ever and ever? No, it's not. It is not forever and ever and ever and ever. It can be expired. Now, we talked about granular permissions. And so by granular permissions, what we mean is it is a ordered pair of I've given you permission to do these 3 things and not these 2 things. And it has cryptological proof. So you can put inside the vCon proofs of the consent, proofs of the integrity of the consent that was given, and pointers to where you can find that consent again. So this is actually on our extra side. I want to give a little extra to the ClueCon members here. So also in that consent is some optional features which are really pretty cool. The first is the URL to the terms of service agreement. Did you know that when you buy a piece of software or you use a service as a terms of service agreement? I'm sure you do. And as lawyers that do too, there's a complete legal infrastructure of how to handle this. By putting a URL to the terms of service agreement or the agreement itself into the consent attachment, your lawyers have an ability to actually track the rights of both parties. Secondly, in a consent ledger, we're going to talk about that in a second. Remember about Skit and being able to write things to the Skit ledger? Well, this is what we're talking about. We're able to set this particular vCon as being managed by that ledger. That means if you want to make sure you know that this consent has not been withdrawn, look there. If you want to update this data, tell us there. And finally, this is the first protocol in the IETF that is supporting AI pref. And AI pref is the upcoming AI vocabulary standard. So if you ever wondered, wait a second, what does it mean, text and data mining or AI generation? Who knows what those things mean? Well, there's actually a standard for that called AI pref. The consent attachment supports that. So because I can show you some code, I will. So this is actually a consent attachment. The consent attachment is simply a piece of JSON, well described. And so you can see maybe quarter way down, you can see the proof array, like the proof of consents, time-stamped and typed, internal and external. If you just give this to a robot and read it, they know what they're talking about. It's easy to read, easy to work with, not very convoluted. OK, second thing, I've said it before, but I'll say it more bluntly. Consent, unlike love, is not forever. Consent comes and consent goes. And because consent comes and consent goes, we have a dynamic data problem here. But just look at this Skit diagram for a second to see what are the things that change? What are the things that have to be tracked? So for instance, if you're using Skit on a vCon lifecycle, you can say, I made this vCon. Why is that important? I want to know if it's fake. Is this a real recording made by a real person or not? If Verizon says, I made this from a Verizon handset, you got a pretty good shot that it's probably real. Or what happened to when a customer say, I want to know what happened to my data? The customer might request it, but did the enterprise respond? An auditor wants to see both. And of course, the hardest one, forget me, when a customer asks to be forgotten, is it actually forgotten? And this is where I think the magic comes in as well, because we can use existing auditing procedures to check the Skit ledger against the infrastructure. If they don't match, something's wrong. So what are in the lifecycle events? This is the second draft. The first draft was the consent extension. This is the second draft, which is the vCon lifecycle. And the vCon lifecycle is what are all the times and places that we write events to that Skit log so we can tell what happened to the vCon. So lifecycle management, who made it? Who enhanced it? Who shared it? Who now has a copy of it? Who now has to be told when my consent has been withdrawn? Your digital rights. Okay, my consent has been added, my consent has been withdrawn. You, as a data subject, have every right to know how your data was processed. And what does that mean? Well, every geography is going to figure out what that means for them. But I'll tell you where you're going to find it. You're going to find it on the skit log. Here is where your conversation was analyzed for bias. Here's where your conversation was analyzed for buying behavior. And finally, compliance and governance. This has been a thorny problem for as long as we've had phones. We've had no ability to have third parties truly measure the work that we do for privacy, and this enables it. So finally, this is my second to last slide here. Let me show you how it kind of puts together in practice. So if you follow this diagram, I'm the customer, and for some reason I've been recorded, I've sent an email, I've sent a text message, I have now had a vCon made of me. Now this vCon is pushed into a conserver where that vCon is taken care of, where it's saved, where it's amended, where it's listening for right to withdraw requests. And when that vCon hits the first conserver, it writes to the transparency ledger, I just got the vCon. So immediately what can happen now? That customer can now, independently of the vendor, independently of what happens tomorrow, can inspect that transparency ledger for an authoritative list of what's happened to his conversation. It continues. Let's say the vCon and the data controller in the first one is pushed off to another service provider. Maybe they're doing fraud analysis. Maybe it's DeepGram and they're doing transcriptions. Maybe it's OpenAI and they're doing a keyword analysis. Well, as that vCon hits that far-end conserver, remember that conserver has the URL in it. That conserver knows exactly where to put that transparency ledger events, all the times and places where it's been changed. So that when that customer says, please forget me, that's in the transparency ledger, and both conservers have access to it and can take appropriate steps and record that they did. So one of the ways in which I try to explain this to people is the vCons are a way for the good guys to prove they did the right thing. Okay, this is not the opportunity to catch bad guys, except for the fact that they, unfortunately, aren't acting like the rest of us. Well, sorry about that. Anyways, I have one thing left to go, and I'll get to it. Hold on. There we are. All right. So finally, this also enables the governance for the very same reason as the customers to take a look at the skit log and to compare the reality to the ledger to make sure nothing has changed. All of these things can be automated. None of these things require hard work. They require systems that are properly set up. So if you're interested in this, I'd love for you to get more involved. It's a growing thing. We have 9 vendors now that have showed up for the last vCon interop. There are a number of major phone companies that are in POCs. And there are a number of really great applications that use vCons, which are kind of stunning. So the open source is at GitHub on vCon Dev. You can find our standard and our standard work at the IATF. We've got a show coming up. If you want some documentation, you're more of a reader, go to conserver.io. Conserver is the term I coined. It's a combination of conversation server. It's also the French verb to keep, so it sounded poetic. That's all the French I know. And finally, you have an open invitation. We're going to be having half a day of vCon training at the KPASA show in Amsterdam this spring. And we have another IATF in Montreal in November. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas. And of course, there's Fall vCon, isn't there? Fall vCon in October in Dallas.
Fall vCon in Dallas.
21st to 23rd, yes. I think, if you get bitten by the vCon bug.
Yes.
OK, we've got time for just 1 or 2 questions. If anybody has one for Thomas while he's here. I'm looking and I'm not seeing.
Oh, yes.
Where am I looking? Did somebody have a question and I missed it?
No.
OK, it looks like you're free to go, Thomas.
Thank you.
But if you want to ask Thomas any questions, he's going to be here.
I'll be here for the night. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas, once again.